Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the interviews here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you're interested or know anybody that would be interested in coming on the show and chatting with me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is Isaac R. Levin. All right, so with that out of the way, I'm looking forward to my conversation. We had a ton of fun last time we saw each other on the conference circuit, and let's just get right into it. So my guest today is Diana Pham. Diana, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Isaac, for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana. I'm a developer advocate at Vonage, and today we're going to talk about some fun stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we have an hour, so hopefully some of the stuff will be fun. Maybe not all of it. Yeah, no, probably all of it, because you are awesome. We talked a little bit before the show, and you kind of let me in on a little bit of your origin story in tech. And I'd love to kind of, if you want to just let our audience know, like, how you got started. Like, when was the point in time you came across technology and you're like, oh, this is fun. I kind of want to work on this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I got my bachelor's from UC San Diego in linguistics, and right after that, I got into localization. So I was working for a company that did tech. So it was a tech company that did like translations for, legal documents and things like that. And I got really curious into the language engineering part of it, but I just never had the opportunity to work in that space. And not having the skills for that really set me back because my manager at the time wasn't a big fan of me learning outside of my role, which then I learned that like was a very rare thing, or not like rare, but like normally a manager should be happy for you when you want to learn more difficult topics.
You would think so. You would think so, yeah.
Right. So that was the case. Long story short, I finished my contract with that company and I decided I was going to get into tech. And the way I was going to do that was going straight to grad school, which now that I tell the story, I realize, wow, like Diana, you're kind of crazy for going straight into a master's program. So I decided to apply for grad school, get my degree in computer science without having ever coded in my life, like properly coded. I've came across some code, but nothing beyond Code Academy. And so that was my entry into tech.
Wow. So you have a bachelor's and a master's in two different, I guess, industry's not the right word, but two different disciplines, right? So that's awesome. So here's a question for you. Do you like, what are some of the things that you see that translate between what you learned when you were getting your bachelor's versus what you learned getting your master's? I'd love to kind of hear some of that if there's anything.
Yeah, so since I was a linguistics major, there are different categories or specializations that you can get into. I did something called speech sciences, and I feel like that's just kind of a buzzword of things that they want you to have on your resume or make you feel special that you went to school. But really, it's the path that a lot of people who want to get into speech language pathology do. So I really thought I was going to be a speech therapist one day, and
Oh,
I
okay.
ended up not doing that at all. But one of the other disciplines was computational linguistics, which was more like in learning and Python focused. And by the time I learned about it, I was truly convinced like, oh, it's way too late for me to start coding. It's way too late for
Sure.
me to get into tech. You know, it was one of my last semesters or quarters at the time. And so I was very not convinced that I could ever do it. And so there was definitely crossover. I just didn't know how I could cross over without spending an extra year in college while I was literally a couple weeks away from graduating.
That's fascinating to me. Like the idea, I mean, it's kind of a risk, right? Like because you, like you said, you didn't have a ton of history or background in technology in general. So like, what was, I guess, the big driving factor for wanting to go into tech? Like you could have gone anywhere. You could have like gotten your master's in, you could have gone down the medical route or the legal route,
Right.
or yeah. So what was it about tech specifically that interested you?
Right. So I think that something that I wish I had known before was that I wasn't as interested in the medical fields as I had thought. It was more of something that I thought I just wanted to do because it was medical related. And I was like, oh, maybe I could secure a future in this area. And that
Sure.
turned out not to be the case. I was doing like, smaller contracting jobs, doing behavioral health and working with patients. And it just wasn't really for me. And so I wish there
Hmm.
was some way for me to know that like tech was an alternative. But what really got me attracted to it was just I think I'm a pretty logical person. And when I was crunching the numbers, I was like, job security seems like it's there. Of course,
Yep.
nothing's guaranteed, but job security seemed like it was there. And it was definitely something that I needed as a resource. Like money has definitely got me very far, like in, I don't want to say life, but
Yeah.
whenever I've had issues, it's surprising how easily money fixes the problem after I've gotten into tech.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that was definitely like one of the driving factors. But outside of that, I was just looking at tech from a very general perspective, and I was like, this is kind of cool. Also, coming from a more unique background, like I'm a first gen Vietnamese American. My parents, they really struggle with using some technologies just because it's
Hmm.
not as friendly for people who might not have like English as their first language. And so I thought about that and I was like, oh, there are some use cases. I didn't know they were called use cases at the time, but I was kind of like digging into different technologies and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is kind of cool and it'd be really nice to be that person to develop them.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack there that, um, specifically like the money thing, right? Like, and I don't think that it's wrong for anybody to think that getting into tech for the money is like frowned upon. Like, I think at the end of
Hmm.
the day, like you can get into tech for a lot of reasons. One, like it could be the only thing that you've ever really like cared about, which is cool.
Hmm.
But for a lot of people, like financial stability is very, very important.
Hmm.
And I think it's very well documented that technology is great in that sense. In some cases, not for every case, but in some cases. And I think at the end of the day, like all we want is to like live comfortably. I think, like sure there might
Oh,
be some other
absolutely.
people that have other goals in life, but like number one, I think should be to live comfortably, or to not be in fear of not having a place to live or not having food or whatever, right? And money fixes that. Money doesn't cure happiness, but I think it does help. That's fair to say.
Yeah, it fixes a lot of problems that can make you
Yeah.
unhappy.
Yeah, oh, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. But it also introduces all sorts of problems, like where am I going to put all the stuff that I keep buying? That's a whole conversation for a different day.
Right, right.
So, what kind of courses did you take during your master's program? Because I'd imagine, at least initially, it was pretty jarring, right? Like going from like a non-technical sort of discipline into, oh, you're going to learn about algorithms and data structures and all these sort of things, right? Like I'd imagine initially you're like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, interesting is definitely a word. So with my program, it was a bridge program. So what they did was they crammed 4 years of what you normally learn in undergrad into 2 semesters. And that was probably like some of the most difficult points of my life just because I was
Sure.
moving to, yeah, I moved out for the first time. And I mean like out as in like out, out. I wasn't living with my parents in when I did my undergrad, but I was living with like relatives. And so
Yep.
it never felt like I was starting over and like getting that
Looks like we
doing
got some.
school on top of that
Yeah.
was really, really difficult. But as for courses, I remember starting off with a Python class and then Java and a C. Honestly, I've not touched C ever since I learned it.
Sure. Well, I think that there's a trend. There's a trend there. You learn C, and then hopefully you never touch C again. Not to knock people that love C or have worked in C and continue to work in C, but for a lot of folks,
Right.
it's a bit low level, right, for what a lot of people are trying to accomplish. I interrupted you. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Other classes, I mean, there were quite a few of the classes that a lot of people, we can trauma bond about it. If anyone wants to follow me, reach out to me on Twitter at Diana's Oyster. But, there's like the algorithms class, discrete
Yeah.
math, fun stuff, fun stuff. But I think the more genuinely fun topics that I've learned were like machine learning based.
Hmm.
I didn't know that there would ever be an opportunity for me to get into that unless I actually got a PhD or something. But it's been a topic that I've been able to work on at Vonage, and I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah. And I want to talk about some of the stuff that you're doing at Vonage in a little bit, but I'm still kind of fascinated with this, like, because I think that there is a trend in technology that I see people that are in career and have been in career, like they've been doing something else, and then they want to get into tech at some point later in their career. But I haven't had an opportunity to talk to many
Right.
people that went to university, did a little bit of work in like what they got their bachelor in, and then they're like, no, I like tech. I want to get into tech. So I want to drill
Right.
on that. I want to drill on that a little bit more, specifically like, because good, bad, or indifference, you have taken university courses in computer science more recently than I have, and more recently than a lot of folks have, right? And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on how that experience was for you, because I can only speak for myself. Like, I don't think, at least in my personal opinion, a lot of the stuff that I learned in college, I could directly correlate it into like things I did as a part of my work. And I'd be curious to know if that has changed, at least from your perspective in the program that you took, or it's a little bit of both. Like I learned some stuff, but there was some stuff that I just threw away, like C obviously being one of them.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the fundamentals were super helpful for me. What was even more helpful was learning to work with others in
Yes.
this kind of space. And I don't know if it's maybe it's just me, but doing group work in computer science is so different from doing group work in any other
Yes.
major that I've ever studied. Like even when you take classes that aren't quite related to your major, bachelor's, and you start collaborating with other people, it's so different. And suddenly you start coding with other people and sharing your repos, and it's definitely a discipline.
Yes.
That and just working with people who don't think that you're smart enough to be in this field. I didn't think that that was going to
Oh.
be a lesson that I had to take in here, but I thought my school was pretty good in terms of diversity. But you still come across those people who really doubt your abilities just because you're not looking like one of them.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, that and thanks for saying that. Like I think that there's a ton of interesting conversation that could be had about, and it's unfortunate to hear that you had a little bit of that at the university level. Like
Mm,
I think at least professionally there is definitely some problems or opportunities is a
mm,
better way to phrase it, like between women in tech, underrepresented groups in tech in general. But to hear that it's kind of like at the university level as well, in some cases, is probably part of the overarching, I guess, opportunity that we have. But you
mm.
said that for the most part there was a fair amount of diversification. But I think one of the things that you probably took from it is that I need to be I got to speak for myself more. I have to kind of be my own champion, all the cliches, right? So, did you learn pretty quickly that you had skills that a lot of people that were in classes that look like me, for instance, didn't have? That you had some skills that they didn't have?
I definitely felt like I did, but after experiencing something like that, just the misogyny I experienced in that
Yeah,
course, it really, really took a hit on my self-esteem for some time. And it took some time for me to recover from that just because,
sure.
it doesn't help that I think I was newer to the program than that person. But definitely, I think something that really helps me prove that I'm like, oh, I'm actually capable of rationalizing this is there was a time where we had to make some technical decision on the project, and I handed my phone to a male employee friend who worked at Amazon at the time. So they've been pretty seasoned.
Yep.
And those two went back and forth talking to each other. And of course, my classmate had no clue that he was talking to like a dude in tech who's been
Yeah.
working for some time now.
Yeah.
And just like how defensive this person got about these decisions. And my friend was like, wow, really? Like he has no clue that he's talking to me. And that's probably why he's being as defensive as he is when really these are not the technical decisions that like I would personally make either. And so the
Yeah.
fact that I was even able to like come up with that rationale, I was like, huh, I'm actually capable of some things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that there is something to say that there are certain personality types that have problems with being incorrect, and it doesn't really matter who
Mhm.
you are. Not to say that that person would have treated anybody else differently in that situation, but I've ran
Mhm.
into people like that in my life, in my career, where you run into them and you just know for a fact they're not going to give you a good they're not going to give you a good experience. And
Right.
I think that's kind of one of our goals to be better people is to avoid people that we can't fix. At least
Mhm.
that's probably a spicy take that I've had in my life, where some people just it's not worth the effort because it's gonna end up not working out in the long run. But it's good to hear
Mhm.
that you had a support system at the time around you. It's like, no, like what you're doing is not ridiculous. It's credible. And who knows,
Mhm.
like, these are decisions that we make in the field, which, if you talk to kids in university now, all they want to know is like, how do I get a job and how do I work in tech?
Right.
Like, how do I get a job and how do I work in tech? So yeah, it's interesting. So how did after you left school, after you graduated, like like what was that experience like looking for roles, like looking for jobs? Was there certain companies you wanted to work for, certain roles you wanted to have, or was it just like get me a job as soon as possible?
So you see, I would think I was really, really blessed. I guess that's the word I'll use. That I had 3 internships while I was still in school. And I
Mm,
know I feel like I was just so lucky with every single opportunity that I had. And so having that kind of background, internships on top of freelancing and DevRel, which I totally didn't expect to do when I started the program, those pretty much fluffed up my resume. And,
sure.
I'm going to be honest, there are going to be people who say, like, what's on your resume doesn't really matter. It's just your skills or like
Mm,
your experience, your personal experience will back you up more than anything. But honestly speaking, I think having a master's on my resume definitely got me some of those interviews.
sure.
And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
Um, so when it came down to looking for a job, the last company that I worked with, unfortunately, they didn't have the budget to keep me, and I was really,
Mm,
really looking forward to staying with them. So that was really tough. I graduated. I mean, this happens all the time, but I graduated the same time that they were hiring freezes.
yeah. Yeah.
And I remember there was actually one company that I had interviewed for, pretty much got the offer verbally. All they needed to do was send me the offer so that I can sign. And the person who was supposed to send me the offer was on holiday. And the day that they got back, that was when the hiring freeze
Oh
happened.
no. Wow.
So I lost an offer I never really had. And that
Oh
that was
no.
really, yeah, that kind of sucked. Um,
Yeah.
but, just the process and realizing that I never should be stuck to one industry or like bank on working at one company, because I know there are like company obsessed people who
Yep.
are like, I'm either going to work here or I'm not working anywhere. And I'm like, dude, chill. Like, come on, let's
Yeah.
get some experience on the table at least. So that
Yeah.
was definitely something that I had to learn.
Yeah, and I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. If you live in a certain part of the country, like in the U.S., for
Mhm.
instance, right? Like if you work in Seattle or if you work in the Bay Area, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to work at these kind of companies because like that's the way that I know that I'm going
Mhm.
to like kick off success in my life. Um, I mean, I'll be the first one to say like my first job was a very boring job in tech. Like I worked in an insurance company, like doing like line of business applications. So like not exciting stuff. And it wasn't until like the last 5 years or so where I've started to go do quote unquote like fun stuff, like speaking at
Mhm.
events and community work and stuff like that. So like my
Yeah.
like I spent a good amount of my professional career like just doing stuff that not is not very exciting. Stuff that just kind of
Mhm.
made a company some business, and that's totally fine, you know. But I do respect you saying like, oh, like there are some people that they want to work at one of these five companies, but that becomes very
Mhm.
hard because you know some like so does thousands of other people want to work at those places.
Right.
So it led you to Vonage, right, where you're at right now. And you know,
Yes.
I'd love to kind of hear like some of the work that you're doing there. Like you're in developer relations, DevRel. Like, you know,
Yes.
what are some of the fun things that you've gone to do, or things that you've kind of, because this space is interesting, and I'm rambling for a bit, so I apologize.
No, you're good.
Like DevRel is interesting to me because depending on where your interests lie, you can do kind of all sorts of different things as long as you can tie it back to like bringing business value, right? So
Right.
I know I didn't really ask a question, but thoughts?
No, definitely. So I didn't know this when I got into DevRel, but there's no actual checklist of things that you need to do in order to
Yes,
be a
yes,
qualified DevRel engineer or dev advocate. And I spent a lot of time during my graduate program figuring that out because every internship that I did was something DevRel related, which is pretty, I don't know if that's uncommon, but I don't know very many people who've done that.
yeah,
And so I spent a lot of time figuring out what I didn't like to do more so than what I did like to do. And so when it came down to finding a job, I was really fortunate that Vonage pretty much offered the things that I did enjoy doing, or at
yeah,
least I thought I would, and I do. I know I'm like super, super guilty of this, but I tend to glamorize my job when I'm talking about it to other people because I don't
mm,
want people to hear about, the bad parts, or not that I
sure,
mind, but those aren't the fun things to talk about.
yeah,
But as for tasks that I enjoy, I really like going to conferences and just meeting people there.
yep,
And something that I often do at conferences, especially if my company sponsors it, is going to different booths and just seeing what people are up to and how
yeah,
they could pretty much summarize, like, what do you do? Because often
hmm,
you open up tech websites and they'll tell you like what they do, and you're like, okay, cool, but like,
yeah,
what do you actually do? You know?
yeah,
So
yeah,
those are one of my favorite things to do. So conferences, talking at them. I very recently started in the talking circuit, and that's actually
yeah,
how we met in person. I did my first international talk in Japan, so that was exciting. I I'm not a huge blog writing person, but I
yeah,
find I get it. I get the value. I get the value
yep,
behind it. I love doing video like content creation as well. Yeah, I guess those are like my top two that I really enjoy doing. Social media, I've never been like good at it, and I realize it's something that I had to learn to do if I'm in this discipline.
sure,
And I say discipline versus role because it's
yeah,
not just like, oh, here are a checklist of items that you just need to do. It's like, no, you actually have to learn how to be good at it.
yes,
which I get. It's like with any job, but
yeah. And that's, I mean, I agree with basically everything you just said. The thing that I think it's very, very interesting, especially, and I think you and I share this, like the connecting with people is the best part of the job, right?
Mhm.
Like being out there, speaking, talking to folks, like even like walking through a convention center and like talking to attendees or talking to other partners or people who are working booths, like that is the fun part. Everything else is, it's okay. I mean, I'm not saying that like there are
Yeah.
good parts and bad parts of everything, but like the thing that I really get excited about is being able to talk to people. I think probably naturally because I'm just an extrovert and I just like talking to people in general.
Yeah.
But I'd love to kind of get your thoughts like when like was there some anxiety around like speaking for the first time, or was it something where you're like, I want to do this, I like doing it, I talk to people a lot already, like I want to get on stage, and it doesn't really affect me in that way?
Oh, for sure. I was so nervous. My first two, three, actually, every time I've ever
Yep.
spoken, I've gotten nervous. And the funny thing is, I tell people the first time I spoke, I felt like that spoiled kid with rich parents who just paid for them to do activities that other people would have to earn otherwise. Because my
Sure.
first two speaking opportunities were because Vonage was a sponsor. And
Yep.
I'm super grateful for that. Like, I wish I didn't doubt myself so much when it came to
Yeah.
writing my talk, because I was like, why would people come to listen to me talk? Like, I didn't even earn this, as in, like, I didn't submit a
Yeah.
CFP. So I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the process, but, submitting an abstract and getting the conference organization or or what's the word? Organizers
Yep.
to accept it. And then that's when you write the talk and then you go deliver it. So I didn't go through that process because
Yeah.
Vonage just had a speaking slot.
Yeah.
And I think it made me even more nervous just because I'm like, do I feel like I deserve to be here? But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I was like, no, I definitely do deserve to be here. And I continue to submit those same talks to other
Yep.
conferences. And I've been pretty lucky since then.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and thank you for kind of outlining how the CFP or call for papers process works. And like another
Yeah.
additional wrinkle is like is sometimes in some scenarios, if you're a company and you sponsor an event, that organizer will give you a speaking slot as like part of your sponsorship benefits.
Mhm.
I've had the luxury in my life to get one of those slots, and you, Diana, mentioned that as well. And I'm always surprised too, where it's like they're not like usually labeled as like, oh, this is a sponsor session. It's usually just a session in
Mhm.
general, right? So
Mhm.
I think people, especially who go to events, are genuinely curious about things they don't know.
Mhm.
So if they see something on Vonage or some other sort of content, and like the abstract
Mhm.
sounds kind of cool or the title's catchy, they're like, oh, I'll go and sit in there. And worst case, it's an hour, or
Yeah.
in some cases, people will just walk out too. But yeah, it is interesting that you said that you get a bit nervous.
Mhm.
I guess I'm blessed with the fact that I really don't get nervous. I get more anxious about trying to be the best that I can be, but it's not like nervous.
Mhm.
Um, and I think what's interesting too is, and I'll tell you as somebody who's worked with a lot of, fairly well-known speakers in my life, like some
Mhm.
people, if they're nervous to five people or 5,000. So
Mhm.
I think the best way that we can do is like harnessing that anxiety, that fear, and turning into like passion, right? Because as an attendee, and you've watched sessions, like the
Yeah.
idea that if you watch somebody and they're kind of like owning the experience, owning the room, owning the conversation, like even if the content isn't great, like you feed off of that person's energy and you want to go and do stuff. And like the goal should be as a public speaker to get people like interested in wanting to try what you're talking about or wanting to learn more.
Right.
Anything else other than that, in my opinion, like I don't really see the value. There's might be some other people that listen to this or are watching this that are like, no, here's a good reason why you should be a speaker. But
Mhm.
my thing is very much just like growing awareness for whatever you're talking about,
Mhm.
or just starting a good conversation.
Yeah, I definitely feel like before every talk, I get really nervous, and the moment I open my mouth, it just all goes away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I don't know what it is. It's not like I said anything that made myself feel better. I think I often get a speaker's high after as well.
yep,
And just that feeling of having people ask questions and coming up to me and wanting to engage in conversation about whatever we just talked about, it's not even like challenging me or just genuine, like, oh,
yeah,
how do you feel about this? And I get a speaker's high from that. And I think I that's what kind of makes me want to come back and continue
yeah,
doing these talks.
yeah. That's great, and especially just calling it out, like sometimes at conferences, women specifically or underrepresented groups, people that don't look like me, sometimes if they're a
Mhm.
speaker, they get, I guess, questioned a lot, like, oh, like
Mhm.
what is your real job or whatever. And it's good to hear that you haven't had a ton of experiences like that, which is great to hear.
Mhm.
Because in my experience, like I've said this a few times, the best conference talk that I ever saw in my entire life was from a woman who lost access to the internet when she was showing the Azure portal. Like that was like the best talk I've ever seen in my entire life because
Oh my goodness.
she was able to drive an hour long conversation without access to the internet when she needed to show things that were on the internet. So anyway, like the most ridiculous thing that I think, or not the most ridiculous thing, the most interesting thing that I find out about tech too is or about conference speaking as well, is you can talk about tech or you can talk about kind of like soft skills or things that are, I guess, are tech adjacent. Like, do you have a
Yeah.
preference on what kind of content you talk about? Like, because obviously I think that there's a lot to learn from any sort of person who wants to talk about their own journey. But do you enjoy
Mhm.
speaking about certain topics more than others?
I do. So I think that my very first talk was, what was my first talk about? Oh, it was about chatbot therapists and how we've pretty much revolutionized from having the very first one, which is Eliza, to, nowadays ChatGPT is trying to replace some therapists out there. And I
Yeah,
thought that that was a really interesting topic for myself. And because of that, I wanted to share it with others, and I just kind of got conversations going, and it also just being interested in that topic made me want to learn more about it. And so that was one of my favorite talks that I've done so far. Again, I didn't feel like I had the credibility to do it, um, because I wasn't super well versed and I've never, studied chatbots formally.
sure.
And I think that that's such a huge misconception that I wish like I got over before doing that talk, because at the end of it, one of the best feedback that I got was from this attendee who came up to the booth after and was like, "Oh, my son's in high school. He's not in tech, but he watched your talk and he really enjoyed it. And I just want to let you know." And I think creating more beginner friendly content like that and delivering a talk that is digestible to multiple people is more of my preference for sure. That, but I also do soft skill talks. I don't know if you would consider it soft skills, but my very first CFP to have been accepted was titled "How to Talk to Women," and it pretty much just highlights the experiences and adversities that women deal with in the tech space, and that has been my most popular talk, and
Sure.
I'm actually doing it in 3 different countries this year. So
That's awesome.
topic that yeah, topic that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and there were a lot of women involved in making that talk happen. I got a lot of data points from people who've been in this industry a lot longer than me, and I mean I'm blessed that I haven't gotten the amount of harassment and just creepers that they have, but it's good
Yeah.
insight for me. It's definitely good insight for me writing that kind of talk.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. And I think specifically that it's on a topic that I think is like I mentioned this a bit earlier, like it kind of needs to be, people need to be reminded constantly about this sort of
Mhm.
thing because the only thing, I say this a lot, the only way that we can really grow better as a species is by continuously like looking at the opportunities that we've missed and continue to grow upon those opportunities. Otherwise, like history will repeat itself over and over and over again. And
Mhm.
I'm not interested in that. So, what is the general, like when you do a talk like that? And I imagine,
Mhm.
good, bad, or indifferent, most of the audience isn't doesn't look like you, right? So, how is that experience? Like, I'd imagine that obviously, I think that you probably get a certain kind of individual that goes to a session like that anyway. Like if you're not
Mhm.
interested in that sort of content, you're not going to go to that session. So I think for the most part,
Right.
you have a fair amount of allies in there, right?
Right.
Like, what has your experience been like after the talk, or even during the talk? Like, are people like are they really, are you bringing people in? Are people getting really interested? People have lots of good questions during the talk or after the talk. Like, what's been your experience as you've delivered this talk more and more?
Yeah, so how to talk to women particularly, I did it for the first time in Japan, which is where I'm calling from right now. So
Yeah,
hello everyone from the other side of the world. I'm calling from the future.
that's right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah, yes. But feedback from that talk has been really, really pleasant. And a lot of those questions were either revolved around people saying that, oh, this was really relatable to me and I'm grateful that you brought this up. And so they'll have like a follow-up question on how I might think things should be improved, or like what conference organizers can do to improve that this whole entire situation, you know? And
Hmm.
so getting that, or like men having their like blood boiling knowing that these things happen because, you know, it doesn't happen to them. And so
Yeah.
for me to see them react so strongly and be like, what could I personally do to like make
Yeah.
this not a thing?
Yeah.
And that kind of feedback just makes me really happy. And it was definitely more reassuring that I am a credible person to talk about this, because I was like, I don't know, like, is this topic overdone? Because everyone
Yeah.
tells you, you know, there are creepers out there, or, you know,
Hmm.
oh, my DMs are full with blah, 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 blah. But then when it comes down to it, I was really nervous giving this talk, because I was worried that, like, people have either already done it, they've already
Hmm.
heard it, it's not valuable to them. But so far, since the first time I did it in Yokohama at DevRel Con, it's pretty positive.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be. I think like the next step of evolution in content like the one you're talking about is like
Mm,
is somebody like me presenting it from a point of this is what we need to do better, because I think good, bad, or
mm,
indifferent, I think what's interesting, hearing your voice is really, really important.
mm,
But if a white guy is going to go up on stage and talk about how unfortunate it is to be a woman in tech, I think that would be very interesting. I'm not just saying that like men should only be the ones speaking, but I think that there are scenarios that I see where that would be a bit jarring for folks, because I
oh,
think
for sure.
whenever you have people that are like allies, like the first immediate question is like, okay, so why are you an ally?
Yeah.
Why are you taking the time and investment to do these things? And I mean, I want to commend you for doing a talk like that, because I think from my
Thank you.
perspective, you know, I usually prefer soft skills talks to deep technical talks. It's just
Mm,
kind of how my personality is. So here, because I hear other people's stories, because I really enjoy the storytelling aspect of speaking.
mm,
So I'd love to kind of, you know, noodle your brain a little bit too. Is like, what other sort of topics that, you know, obviously when we're a public speaker or we speak at events, like we're always like noodling with ideas on like, what's the next talk that I'm putting together? Is there anything right now that you're thinking of that's like, oh, it'd be interesting to have a talk around this?
So um, a lot of times I meet people and I'm like, oh, you're a cool person. What do you work on? And
Yeah.
that turns into, hey, is there an opportunity for us to do a talk together?
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be like our companies are like partners, as long as we're not like competitors, you know. But that's pretty much how I go about my upcoming talks. And in the most humble way of saying this, I'm really, really blessed that the talks that I've been doing have been getting accepted. And so I've been really, really focusing on just trying to improve that. For example, the talk that I just mentioned, How Do I Talk to Women? It was a 20-minute talk in Japan and not technical at all. And I've been getting that accepted in other conferences, and I want to make it a more technical talk. So I'm starting to learn how to improve it, and, you know, just adding APIs and demos to the talk somehow.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I
So
guess I'll
like,
talk about it here, but
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, like mixing the idea of like technical and soft skills is very, very interesting to me. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more.
yeah. So this is actually something that I wanted to do, but, you know, given a 20-minute time frame, I couldn't
Sure.
exactly do that. But for future conferences where this talk was accepted, I get like an hour. And so I
Yeah.
was planning on doing the talk as is, or, you know, improved. And then at the end, I wanted to take DMs that, you know, creepy people have sent my female colleagues,
Oh,
and throw
wow.
it
Okay.
into, yes, and then throw it into a model that tells you like the percent, pretty much a sentiment analysis model. And it'll tell you like how creepy this text is, or how likely it is uh, to be considered harassment or something like that. And so that's something that I've been working on at Vonage more recently. I also wanted to write a song. I got a ukulele, hoping that I could I could learn how to play it and write about this, just because I don't know, we could really benefit from. having some entertainment in our talks. And I got this idea from, I don't know if you know Lee Pili, but I
No, I
believe he's
don't.
at VMware right now, and he rapped his talk.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was like, what? Yeah, I actually heard it like in person, and it was super engaging. And I was like, wow, I want to do something like that. And so I was like, what if I just got a ukulele? I'm like not musically talented whatsoever. But I was
Sure.
like, huh, that might kind of add to it. So just ways that I'm trying to improve my talks. Those are two of them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, like the idea of integrating like music and tech. I've talked this about a few times about how there's a non a non small amount of people that are in tech that like to play music. I have a guitar behind me, for instance. Not very good, but
Yeah.
like there's people who play piano and guitar and all sorts of different instruments, and it's interesting. Coincidentally enough, like I guess on the show a few episodes back, Dylan Beatty, he has like incorporated like rock guitar like into his sessions. Like he
That's
has done some
awesome.
really cool stuff, like playing guitar and doing the technical presentation at the same time, and it's captivating. Like it's just another layer. Like we're talking about like engaging with an audience, right? Like what are some things that audiences really respond well to, and like music is definitely one of
Hmm.
them, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's awesome. Like I'm looking forward to like the next time I see Diana present. Like she's gonna have like a ukulele on stage. She's gonna be talking about APIs, and I'm like, oh, this is the life right here. This is awesome.
Yeah. You're going to come out jam with me while I'm on stage.
No, no, I will not be doing that. I will not be
No.
doing that.
You don't want to
Um,
bring your guitar with you?
no, 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 no. No, definitely not. I tell people that these guitars that I have. They're art. It's art. Like I like to look at them and touch them every now and then, but for the most part, they're for looking at. Um, it's funny because like at least I don't know if you're like this a little bit, but I get so distracted doing things that I forget to do stuff. And then if I like, for instance, like with the guitar specifically, like I'll play guitar for like a half hour and like lose track of time, ADHD stuff. And then like I'll put the guitar away and then not touch it for like a week because that's just makes sense, right? Um,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that is me 100%.
yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think that there's a fair amount of people. I mean, so I think certain personality types or behavioral traits map pretty directly to tech, especially
Mhm.
like our little circle of tech, which is, folks that are a bit more vocal online, folks that go to conferences and
Mhm.
speak at events, right? Like, because
Mhm.
to tie back into music, like there is a ton of creativity that goes
Mhm.
into being a speaker, putting together the like a conference session and what have you, right? And it's not extremely different than playing music or art or drawing or sculpting or what have you, right?
For sure.
Yeah, so people talk about how tech is like, oh, it's only math and like it's, left side of your brain and it's analytical. It's like, no, there's definitely some creativity to it as well.
Oh yeah, I feel like one of the reasons why I enjoy my role so much is because it's not mundane where I just code. I actually get to
Hmm.
use my creative like I think I'm a pretty creative person. I just didn't know how to use that creativity when I entered tech. And so I
Yeah.
think that DevRel really gave me that opportunity. And it's not easy. Like, wow, it seems fun and all, but there are days or weeks where I'm like, man, I really want to come up with a cool project and it just
Yep.
hasn't happened,
Yep.
or it's already been done, or how it
Yeah,
goes.
no, I totally agree. Also, like, there's nothing worse than thinking of an idea and you think it's going to go really well, and then you actually try to spec it out, and you're like, oh, I don't have enough. I don't have enough here. Like, this might be a good like 15-minute talk or a 20-minute talk, but I don't have an hour. And that's always disappointing because traditional conferences, like you have like the conference the session length is an hour. Some of them let you do lightning talks or whatever, but for the most part it's like, oh, you need an hour. And there's nothing worse than like finishing like 15 minutes early for an hour long
Oh
conference.
gosh.
Like, yeah, like, oh, let's talk. Do you have anybody has any questions? Nobody raises their hand. You're like, okay, well, enjoy lunch, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had that happen during my first talk where I finished maybe 15 minutes early, and it was after lunch, so everyone was just free to leave.
Everybody was ready to
But
take a nap.
thankfully, Right, right. Thankfully, I did have people like some stragglers waiting for the next talk, and so I went and just thanked them individually for being a part of my talk.
Yeah.
Um, but aside from that, I'm like, man, that really, really sucks. But I think I think one of my favorite things to do when it comes to writing talks is coming up with a catchy title.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and that definitely involves or requires some creativity
Yeah.
because you could easily just be like, here are 10 things that you could do to improve a woman in tech's experience at a conference. And that is not exactly fun.
Sure.
So I was
Sure.
like, huh, how to talk to women. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it like there is definitely because you have to be like captivating. Like the title has to be somewhat catchy, or else people will literally be like, okay, no thanks. Like, I try to phrase all of my session titles in a way that people are like, oh, okay, I don't understand what this title really means, so I need to read the description.
Yeah.
So maybe a
Do you have
bit.
a favorite?
Let's I have so like the one that I've been doing a lot right now is around AWS, and it's running application in the cloud, choose your own adventure. Like that's the talk
Mm-mm.
title. I've kind of started to workshop different names for it because I don't know. I'm not super excited about it. I used to do a couple of other talks. Like I used to work from home talk before the pandemic, where it was like how to work from home with our what was it? How to work from home without I don't know, it was a tongue twister. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was kind of like, oh, our working from home is not for you or something like that. And
Oh, okay.
so it was kind of so it was like people came into a talk with an expectation, and it was always interesting like, oh, I didn't expect this talk to go this way, and I really enjoyed the fact that it did, which I think is kind of the point.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think one of
Yeah.
my favorites, I haven't delivered this one yet, but it's what your crazy ex could teach you about a development pipeline.
Oh my goodness, I would go to that immediately. Oh wow. So
Yeah?
you're much
Oh,
better. You're much better at the titles than I
yeah,
am.
it took a minute. It took a
Yeah,
minute, but I got there. I got there.
that's awesome. I mean, I I can't imagine why that hasn't been accepted. That's ridiculous. Anyway, um, so I'd love to kind of taking a few steps back to like that point in time where you kind of decided to look into like DevRel as a career.
Hmm.
Like what was sort of the reasons? I mean, I think you phrased it pretty perfectly. Like there's no real good job description or like list of
Yeah,
responsibilities. Like
yeah.
so I guess what made you interested in it in general? Was it the just you had an internship and you were given work on some of those topics, or was it some of the community piece, some of the influencing piece? Like, was there any particular reason that drew you to DevRel?
Yeah, so when I originally applied for internships, DevRel was one of my existing options.
Sure.
Um, Alternatively, I could have done like software engineering or something else I forgot. It's just yeah. It feels so long ago, and it really wasn't. But it just sounded interesting to me, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a shot. And the reason why I stuck with it, or what like really stood out to me that made me want to continue doing the things that I did, I think I mentioned earlier that going through these internships, I learned more about what I didn't like than what I did
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And so at the very first company that I interned at, I learned that I didn't like documentation. And I
Okay.
decided that that wasn't going to be something that I want to continue doing. But thankfully, my manager was really flexible with me and allowed me to try out other work in DevRel, even if it wasn't specific to their team. And so that's when I found advocacy because originally I was only doing docs, which is part of DevRel. And then once I did that very small project for the advocacy team, I wasn't completely sure if it was just the grass is greener on the other side situation,
Yeah.
but I was more passionate about doing that project than I was on writing docs for the past 3 months. And I really, really felt like, oh, I signed up for this job, so I should learn to love it. And
Yeah.
I went into interviews telling people, I'm like, yeah, like I want to do docs. Why? Because it's on my resume and I've been doing this for the past 3 months.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
realized like that isn't a way to go about it. And I just had to be honest with myself, like this isn't what I want to do. I want to do something else that I've never actually formally done before. And so building out demos, writing up a little snippet for other people to use it and just like be able to pass that project on and see other people use it, that was way more exciting to me than writing docs. And so my heart goes out to people writing docs. Y'all are made different and I'm very grateful for you, but unfortunately that's just not for me.
So I'll just say this, and I don't mean this to sound anything disparaging or anything, but you found your place in technology because you don't like writing docs. I think that's
There
like
we
the
go.
the telltale testament of like any software engineer, somebody likes to be in tech. For most of us, like documentation is like, and writing tests are like the lowest of the low. Like I want to be like innovating. I want to build new stuff. I want to build
Mhm.
exciting stuff. And like, I mean, to be fair, like docs aren't super exciting, but like it's a very valuable skill. Like I've worked
Yeah.
with some people that are brilliant at writing documentation or writing blogs, and I do
Mhm.
have like a little bit of envy because it takes a lot of work for me to write together like a blog post. It's pretty good,
Same.
at least in my opinion, because at least I'm very guilty of writing a blog like I talk, and
Oh,
that's not for
same.
that's not for human consumption. Like it's nonsense. Like there's sentences in there that are trash. There's meandering around, and like to be able to write like a crisp blog post is a skill that I've tried to learn, and I've not figured out how to accomplish it yet.
Yeah, and I feel like people who write docs versus blogs, that is a whole other discipline.
Yeah.
And so when I meet people who are really passionate about that, I'm like, go you.
Yeah, no, it is pretty interesting. Like the whole idea that, and to kind of go back to some of the content things that you like to work on, right? How you can be in the same field or have the same title as somebody else,
Mhm.
and you do completely different things. Like I work with people that all they do is
Yes.
write blog posts, and like I'm more on the speaking side and like a little bit of video content,
Yeah.
interview type stuff like this, and like I enjoy it. And I talk to
And
some of
you're
my
good at it.
colleagues. I'm all right. And I talked to some of my colleagues, and like I could never do that, like the speaking thing or the
Mhm.
creating videos. Like I could never do that. And I'm like, it's so funny how some people have like they have affinities to certain sets of skills and like
Mhm.
no interest in focusing on other sets of skills. Like if you realize, other than maybe writing blogs or doing docs, that you're like, these are things that I would rather never work on, never do.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just it took me some time to find my place in DevRel, and I feel like I still am. I'm fairly new to this space, but it really, really helped to just know what I didn't like before I started figuring out what I do like. So if
Mm.
there's any college student listening right now, don't do what I did and just try to convince yourself that you really like something just because you were forced into doing it and
Yeah.
contracted for only 3 months. 3 months of your life is a very short amount of time, and I couldn't really wrap my head around that at the time.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, and I think you are a great example of it, is that you have the opportunity to change no matter where you are in your journey. If you're not enjoying
Yeah.
something, like, and you have the opportunity to work on other stuff because you have a boss that's accepting, or you have an opportunity to change careers without it like being very problematic from a financial standpoint, like I mean, the world is your oyster, right? Like you have the ability to kind of do what you want if it's in the capacity of that fits into your life. I know that's speaking from a place of privilege, but I think that
Yeah.
I think that a lot of folks think that they get stuck in certain areas of tech. Like, oh, I can only
Mhm.
be working on documentation, or I can only do DevOps, or I can only do
Mhm.
this sort of stuff. But I really want to do this stuff. Look for
Mhm.
opportunities to do the stuff that you find interesting, and eventually the universe will work itself out. That's my thoughts. I know that doesn't work for everybody, sadly, but that's kind of how I go about thinking about things.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny too, to kind of circle back to the things that you're doing with the conference speaking and how you started out, working in linguistics. Do you feel like there's some skills that you learned when you're getting your bachelor's that have correlated positively to some of the stuff that you're doing in speaking, some of the stuff that you're doing engaging with individuals? Like, is there a good amount of overlap there, or is it Diana had a unique set of skills that fit into certain scenarios?
I think oh, wow, that's a really good question. I can't think of anything in particular, but I'm pretty sure there was some type of overlap when it comes to skills. I mean, linguistics is pretty much a study of languages, and
Yep.
in computer science, we work with languages all the time.
Yep.
And the most ironic thing is that when I started coding, I was struggling so much with syntax, which is the one thing that I thought I would really pick
Yeah.
up from
Sure.
linguistics. And so I don't know what happened there, but definitely that. Um, yeah, outside of that, during college, I was having like my broke college student phase
Sure.
where
Sure.
I was really, really trying to, find ways to pay for tuition. And, getting a part-time job at the time was one thing. Another thing I did was compete in beauty pageants.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yes, so those pageants actually did help me pay for some of college, which was exciting. So, whatever skills that I learned from pageants, like public speaking was one of them, I brought into my actual job.
Okay, we have to unpack this a little bit, right?
Oh
So,
boy.
yeah, so like obviously I love the beauty pageant tech cross thing. I think that's awesome. Is that something that you're still interested in doing, or is it something that you're like, okay, it was good to make money, but now maybe not so much?
So now it's definitely not like, oh, this is my number one source of income. It's definitely more of something that I want to do for fun. And so, happy announce this is actually the first place I'm announcing this, but I'll be competing for Miss Colorado in May. So, my
That is
title
awesome.
going into it is Miss River North, so Miss Rhino. Kind of interesting because I just recently moved to Denver. So, River North is an area in Denver. But yeah, so that's pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. Love that just because this organization, they make each girl have a social impact platform. And mine is called Blooming Flowers in Tech. So introducing women to tech. Pretty much what I did. And I think that I would have really benefited from having a mentor or someone who went through a similar experience. And so that's what I'm advocating for.
That is awesome. I commend you 1,000,000%. I can only imagine the effort that it takes to be successful in that area. I mean, as somebody who doesn't know a lot about beauty pageants other than like very 101 level thing, I imagine there's a million things that go into it. But I think the idea to like get STEM in front of different audiences is really, really awesome. Like, so, I mean, I'm expecting you to like win Miss Colorado, and then
Oh
like
boy.
Miss USA or Miss America, whatever the next thing, and then like Miss Universe, and then like I don't know, whatever the next step after Miss Universe is, and so you can keep promoting STEM and tech to people that might not be aware of it, because I think that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just glad I have this platform to share that. In the past,
Yeah.
I've actually done a tech demo as my talent. So I'm not doing it this time. Oh, yeah.
Are there
So
videos?
I'm not doing it
I need to see a video of this because I could just
really
I want to see like the person doing like a tech demo or doing something, and then like the
in
judges
90
just
seconds.
yeah, and then like the judges just being like, I don't know what this is like, and this is not, I do not mean this to be offensive, but like when I think of like beauty pageant talents, it's like singing or dancing or baton twirling
Exactly.
or whatever it is, right? I do not know how like doing like, okay, we're gonna wheel out like a mouse and a keyboard and I'm gonna like do a demo, like that's awesome, absolutely awesome. I need to see this if it exists in the world.
I will definitely send it to you. But just letting you know, it has failed in the past. Someone unplugged my router right before I went on
Oh
stage,
no.
and I just stood there. Yeah, and I was just like, alrighty, how do I recover from this? I didn't, but
that
learning experience.
that is absolutely brilliant. Now I'm just going to be impatiently waiting for a video of Diana doing some amazing demo in front of people and they're like, so you don't tap dance, like this is your thing, like okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
Awesome. How did
yeah,
it
yeah.
like, I mean, obviously it was, how did it go over? Like, was there people were like, oh, this is very cool? Was there a lot of confusion? Were there people that are just, I don't get it?
It was so high level, and the thing that I loved about the time that it failed was that my explanation was so high level that when it failed, there was someone in the audience who talked to me after and was like, "Oh, you mentioned this in your like explanation, and I think this is why it failed." And they were like,
Oh,
"Oh, so your router probably got unplugged." And I was like, "That's exactly what happened."
that is amazing. See, there you go. Like already impacting the future, right? Like that is absolutely awesome. I think I have literally have nothing else to say. Like that is absolutely awesome. And looking at the time, we're wrapping up anyway. So I think there's no better way to wrap up than like the image of doing a demo on a beauty pageant stage is awesome. So, as we wrap up, I do like to ask my guests like one final question, and hopefully it's not too terrifying. I love to ask my guests if they can like think of technology, the community around it, and just what the feeling they have when they think about those things, and they only have one word to do so. Like Diana, what would that word be for you?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
One word. Sorry, what was recap the question real quick for me?
Yeah. So if you could think of technology and the community around it, and all the things that you think about when you think of technology, but you only had one word to describe the feeling, what would the word be for you?
Innovative.
Innovative. Awesome. I love it. I love it. And that's it. So as we wrap up, Diana, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and chatting with me about your journey. And I'm only looking forward to seeing more of it. Did you have any parting words or things you want to end on?
No, I just want to say thanks again for having me. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you'd like to connect, I am on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I'm sure Isaac will plug those for you.
Yeah, we'll make sure that all of the links to all of Diana's socials are in the description for this episode. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And again, thank you, Diana. And my name is Isaac Levin. Thank you so much for tuning in to Coffee and Open Source. And we'll see you next time. Take care.